This is a continuation of Thuvia, Maid of Mars, by Edgar Burroughs, comprising chapters 7 through 9. Chapter 7. The Phantom Bowman. As Jav leaped toward him, Carthoris laid his hand upon the hilt of his long sword. The Lotharian halted. The great apartment was empty save for the four at the dais, yet as Jav stepped back from the menace of the Heliumite's threatening attitude, the latter found himself surrounded by a score of bowmen. From whence had they sprung? Both Carthoris and Thuvia looked their astonishment. Now the former's sword leaped from its scabbard, and at the same instant the bowmen drew back their slim shafts. Tario had half raised himself upon one elbow. For the first time he saw the full figure of Thuvia, who had been concealed behind the person of Carthoris. "Enough!" cried the Jeddak, raising a protesting hand, but at that very instant the sword of the Heliumite cut viciously at its nearest antagonist. As the keen edge reached its goal, Carthoris let the point fall to the floor. As with wide eyes he stepped backward in consternation, throwing the back of his left hand across his brow. His steel had cut but empty ere his antagonist had vanished. There were no bowmen in the room. "It is evident that these are strangers," said Tario to Jav. "Let us first determine that they knowingly affronted us before we take measures for punishment." Then he turned to Carthoris, but ever his gaze wandered to the perfect lines of Thuvia's glorious figure, which the harness of a Barsoomian princess accentuated rather than concealed. "Who are you," he asked, "who knows not the etiquette of the court of the last of Jeddaks?" "I am Carthoris, Prince of Helium," replied the Heliumide. "And this is Thuvia, Princess of Tarth. In the courts of our fathers men do not prostrate themselves before royalty. Not since the firstborn tore their immortal goddess limb from limb have men crawled upon their bellies to any throne upon Barsoom. Now think you that the daughter of one mighty Jeddak and the son of another would so humiliate themselves?" Tario looked at Carthoris for a long time. At last he spoke. "There is no other Jeddak upon Barsoom than Tario," he said. "There is no other race than that of Lothar, unless the hordes of Torkas may be dignified by such an appellation. Lotharians are white, your skins are red. There are no women left upon Barsoom. Your companion is a woman." He half rose from the couch, leaning far forward and pointing an accusing finger at Carthoris. "You are a lie," he shrieked. "You are both lies, and you dare to come before Tario, last and mightiest of the Jeddaks of Barsoom, and assert your reality. Someone shall pay well for this. Jav, and unless I mistake, it is yourself who has dared thus flippantly to trifle with the good nature of your Jeddak. Remove the man. Leave the woman. We shall see if both be lies. And later, Jav, you shall suffer for your temerity. There be few of us left, but Komal must be fed. Go." Carthoris could see that Jav trembled as he prostrated himself once more before his ruler, and then, rising, turned toward the Prince of Helium. "Come," he said. "And leave the Princess of Parth here alone," cried Carthoris. Jav brushed closely past him, whispering, "Follow me, he cannot harm her, except to kill, and that he can do whether you remain or not. We had best go now, trust me." Carthoris did not understand, but something in the urgency of the other's tone assured him, and so he turned away, but not without a glance toward Thuvia in which he attempted to make her understand that it was in her own interest that he left her. For answer she turned her back full upon him, but not without first throwing him such a look of contempt that brought the scarlet to his cheek. Then he hesitated, but Jav seized him by the wrist. "Come," he whispered, "or he will have the bowman upon you, and this time there will be no escape. Did you not see how futile is your steel against thin air?" Carthoris turned unwillingly to follow. As the two left the room, he turned to his companion. "If I may not kill thin air," he asked, "how, then, shall I fear that thin air may kill me?" "You saw the Torquasians fall before the bowmen?" asked Jav. Carthoris nodded. "So would you fall before them, and without one single chance for self-defense or revenge?" As they talked, Jav led Carthoris to a small room in one of the numerous towers of the palace. Here were couches, and Jav bid the Heliumite be seated. For several minutes the Lotharian eyed his prisoner, for such Carthoris now realized himself to be. "I am half convinced that you are real," he said at last. Carthoris laughed. "Of course I am real," he said. "What caused you to doubt it? Can you not see me, feel me?" "So may I see and feel the bowmen," replied Jav, "and yet we all know that they, at least, are not real." Carthoris showed by the expression of his face his puzzlement at each new reference to the mysterious bowmen, the vanishing soldiery of Lothar. "What then may they be?" he asked. "You really do not know?" asked Jav. Carthoris shook his head negatively. I can almost believe that you have told us the truth and that you are really from another part of Barsoom or from another world. But tell me, in your own country, have you no bowmen to strike terror to the hearts of the Green Hordemen as they slay in company with the fierce bands of war? We have soldiers, replied Carthoris. We of the red race are all soldiers, but we have no bowmen to defend us such as yours. We defend ourselves. You go out and get killed by your enemies, cried Jav incredulously. Certainly, replied Carthoris. How do the Lotharians? You have seen, replied the other. We send out our deathless archers deathless because they are lifeless, existing only in the imaginations of our enemies. It is really our giant minds that defend us, sending out legions of imaginary warriors to materialize before the mind's eye of the foe. They see them, they see their bows drawn back, they see their slender arrows speed with unerring precision toward their hearts, and they die killed by the power of suggestion. But the archers that are slain? Exclaimed Carthoris. You call them deathless, and yet I saw their dead bodies piled high upon the battlefield. How may that be? It is but to lend reality to the scene, replied Jav. We picture many of our own defenders killed that the Torquasians may not guess that there are really no flesh and blood creatures opposing them. Once that truth became implanted in their minds, it is the theory of many of us. No longer would they fall prey to the suggestion of the deadly arrows, for greater would be the suggestion of the truth, and the more powerful suggestion would prevail at his law. And the Bants? Questioned Carthoris. They too were but creatures of suggestion. Some of them were real, replied Jav. Those that accompanied the archers in pursuit of the Torquasians were unreal. Like the archers, they never returned, but having served their purpose, vanished with the bowmen when the rout of the enemy was assured. Those that remained about the field were real. Those we loosed as scavengers to devour the bodies of the dead of Torquas. This thing is demanded by the realists among us. I am a realist. Tario is an etherealist. The etherealists maintain that there is no such thing as matter, that all is mind. They say that none of us exists, except in the imagination of his fellows, other than as an intangible, invisible mentality. According to Tario, it is but necessary that we all unite in imagining that there are no dead Torquasians beneath our walls, and there will be none, nor any need of scavenging banths. You then do not hold Tario's beliefs? Asked Carthoris. In part only, replied the Lotharian. I believe, in fact I know, that there are some truly ethereal creatures. Tario is one, I am convinced. He has no existence except in the imaginations of his people. Of course, it is the contention of all us realists that all etherealists are but figments of the imagination. They contend that no food is necessary, nor do they eat, but any one of the most rudimentary intelligence must realize that food is a necessity to creatures having actual existence.
Yes, agreed Carthoris. Not having eaten today, I can readily agree with you.
Ah, pardon me, exclaimed Jav. Pray be seated and satisfy your hunger, and with a wave of his hand he indicated a bountifully laden table that had not been there an instant before he spoke. Of that Carthoris was positive, for he had searched the room diligently with his eyes several times. It is well, continued Jav, that you did not fall into the hands of an etherealist. Then indeed would you have gone hungry. But, exclaimed Carthoris, this is not real food. It was not here an instant since, and real food does not materialize out of thin air. Jav looked hurt. There is no real food or water in Lothar, he said, nor has there been for countless ages. Upon such as you now see before you have we existed since the dawn of history. Upon such, then, may you exist. But I thought you were a realist, exclaimed Carthoris. Indeed, cried Jav, what more realistic than this bounteous feast? It is just here that we differ most from the etherealists. They claim that it is unnecessary to imagine food, but we have found that for the maintenance of life we must thrice daily sit down to hearty meals. The food that one eats is supposed to undergo certain chemical changes during the process of digestion and assimilation, the result, of course, being the rebuilding of wasted tissue. Now we all know that mind is all, though we may differ in the interpretation of its various manifestations. Tario maintains that there is no such thing as substance, all being created from the substanceless matter of the brain. We realists, however, know better. We know that mind has the power to maintain substance even though it may not be able to create substance. The latter is still an open question. And so we know that in order to maintain our physical bodies, we must cause all our organs properly to function. This we accomplish by materializing food thoughts, and by partaking of the food thus created. We chew, we swallow, we digest. All our organs function precisely as if we had partaken of material food. And what is the result? What must be the result? The chemical changes take place through both direct and indirect suggestion, and we live and thrive. Carthoris eyed the food before him. It seemed real enough. He lifted a morsel to his lips. There was substance indeed, and flavor as well. Yes, even his palate was deceived. Jav watched him, smiling as he ate. Is it not entirely satisfying? He asked. I must admit that it is, replied Carthoris. But tell me, how does Tario live, and the other etherealists who maintain that food is unnecessary? Jav scratched his head. That is a question we often discuss, he replied. It is the strongest evidence we have of the non-existence of the etherealists, but who may know other than Kamal? Who is Kamal? Asked Carthoris. I heard your Jedek speak of him. Jav bent low toward the ear of the heliumite, looking fearfully about before he spoke. Kamal is the essence, he whispered. Even the etherealists admit that mind itself must have substance in order to transmit to imaginings the appearance of substance. For if there really was no such thing as substance, it could not be suggested. What never has been cannot be imagined. Do you follow me? I am groping, replied Carthoris dryly. So the essence must be substance, continued Jav. Kamal is the essence of the all, as it were. He is maintained by substance. He eats. He eats the real. To be explicit, he eats the realists. That is Tario's work. He says that inasmuch as we maintain that we alone are real, we should, to be consistent, admit that we alone are proper food for Kamal. Sometimes, as today, we find other food for him. He is very fond of Torquasians. And Kamal is a man? Asked Carthoris. He is all. I told you, replied Jav. I know not how to explain him in words that you will understand. He is the beginning and the end. All life emanates from Kamal, since the substance which feeds the brain with imaginings radiates from the body of Kamal. Should Kamal cease to eat, all life upon Barsoom would cease to be. He cannot die, but he might cease to eat and thus to radiate. And he feeds upon the men and women of your belief, cried Carthoris. Women, exclaimed Jav. There are no women in Lothar. The last of the Lotharian females perished ages since, upon that cruel and terrible journey across the muddy plains that fringed the half-dried seas, when the green horde scourged us across the world to this our last hiding place, our impregnable fortress of Lothar. Scarce 20,000 men of all the countless millions of our race lived to reach Lothar. Among us were no women and no children. All these had perished by the way. As time went on, we too were dying and the race fast approaching extinction, when the great truth was revealed to us. That mind is all. Many more died before we perfected our powers, but at last we were able to defy death when we fully understood that death was merely a state of mind. Then came the creation of mind people, or rather the materialization of imaginings. We first put these to practical use when the Torquasians discovered our retreat, and fortunate for us it was that it required ages of search upon their part before they found the single tiny entrance to the valley of Lothar. That day we threw our first bowmen against them. The intention was purely to frighten them away by the vast numbers of bowmen which we could muster upon our walls. All Lothar bristled with the bows and arrows of our ethereal host. But the Torquasians did not frighten. They are lower than the beasts, they know no fear. They rushed upon our walls, and standing upon the shoulders of others, they built human approaches to the wall tops, and were on the very point of surging in upon us and overwhelming us. Not an arrow had been discharged by our bowmen we did but cause them to run to and fro along the wall top, screaming taunts and threats at the enemy. Presently I thought to attempt the great thing. I centered all my mighty intellect upon the bowmen of my own creation. Each of us produces and directs as many bowmen as his mentality and imagination is capable of. I caused them to fit arrows to their bows for the first time. I made them take aim at the hearts of the green men. I made the green men see all this. And then I made them see the arrows fly, and I made them think that the points pierced their hearts. It was all that was necessary. By hundreds they toppled from our walls, and when my fellows saw what I had done, they were quick to follow my example, so that presently the hordes of Torquas had retreated beyond the range of our arrows. We might have killed them at any distance, but one rule of war we have maintained from the first, the rule of realism. We do nothing, or rather we cause our bowmen to do nothing within sight of the enemy that is beyond the understanding of the foe. Otherwise they might guess the truth, and that would be the end of us. But after the Torquasians had retreated beyond bowshot, they turned upon us with their terrible rifles, and by constant popping at us made life miserable within our walls. So then I bethought the scheme to hurl our bowmen through the gates upon them. You have seen this day how well it works. For ages they have come down upon us at intervals, but always with the same results. And all this is due to your intellect, Jav? Asked Carthoris. I should think that you would be high in the councils of your people. I am, replied Jav proudly. I am next to Tario. But why then your cringing manner of approaching the throne? Tario demands it. He is jealous of me. He only awaits the slightest excuse to feed me to Kamal. He fears that I may someday usurp his power. Carthoris suddenly sprang from the table. Jav, he exclaimed. I am a beast. Here I have been eating my fill, while the Princess of Parth may perchance be still without food. Let us return and find some means of furnishing her with nourishment. The Lotharian shook his head. Tario would not permit it, he said. He will, doubtless, make an etherealist of her. But I must go to her, insisted Carthoris. You say that there are no women in Lothar. Then she must be among men. And if this be so, I intend to be near where I may defend her if the need arises. Tario will have his way, insisted Jav. He sent you away, and you may not return until he sends for you. Then I shall go without waiting to be sent for. Do not forget the bowmen, cautioned Jav. I do not forget them, replied Carthoris. But he did not tell Jav that he remembered something else, that the Lotharian had let drop something that was but a conjecture, possibly, and yet one well worth pinning a forlorn hope to, should necessity arise. Carthoris started to leave the room. Jav stepped before him, barring his way. I have learned to like you, Red Man, he said, but do not forget that Tario is still my Jeddak, and that Tario has commanded that you remain here. Carthoris was about to reply, when there came faintly to the ears of both a woman's cry for help. With a sweep of his arm, the Prince of Helium brushed the Lotharian aside, and with drawn sword sprang into the corridor without. Chapter 8. The Hall of Doom. As Thuvia of Parth saw Carthoris depart from the presence of Tario, leaving her alone with the man, a sudden qualm of terror seized her. There was an air of mystery pervading the stately chamber. Its furnishings and appointments bespoke wealth and culture, and carried the suggestion that the room was often the scene of royal functions which filled it to its capacity. And yet nowhere about her, in antechamber or corridor, was there sign of any other being than herself and the recumbent figure of Tario, the Jeddak, who watched her through half-closed eyes from the gorgeous trappings of his regal couch. For a time after the departure of Jav and Carthoris, the man eyed her intently. Then he spoke. Come nearer, he said, and, as she approached, whose creature are you? Who has dared materialize his imaginings of woman? It is contrary to the customs and the royal edicts of Lothar. Tell me, woman, from whose brain have you sprung? Jav's, no, do not deny it. I know that it could be no other than that envious realist. He seeks to tempt me. He would see me fall beneath the spell of your charms, and then he, your master, would direct my destiny and my end. I see it all. I see it all. The blood of indignation and anger had been rising to Thuvia's face. Her chin was up, a haughty curve upon her perfect lips. I know not, she cried, of what you are prating. I am Thuvia, Princess of Parth. I am no man's creature. Never before today did I lay eyes upon him you call Jav, nor upon your ridiculous city, of which even the greatest nations of Barsoom have never dreamed. My charms are not for you, nor such as you. They are not for sale or barter, even though the price were a real throne. And as for using them to win your worse than futile power, she ended her sentence with a shrug of her shapely shoulders and a little scornful laugh. When she had finished, Tario was sitting upon the edge of his couch, his feet upon the floor. He was leaning forward with eyes no longer half closed but wide with a startled expression in them. He did not seem to note the lese-majeste of her words and manner. There was evidently something more startling and compelling about her speech than that. Slowly he came to his feet. By the fangs of Kamal, he muttered. But you are real. A real woman. No dream. No vain and foolish figment of the mind. He took a step toward her, with hands outstretched. Come, he whispered. Come, woman. For countless ages have I dreamed that someday you would come. And now that you are here, I can scarce believe the testimony of my eyes. Even now, knowing that you are real, I still half dread that you may be a lie. Thuvia shrank back. She thought the man mad. Her hand stole to the jeweled hilt of her dagger. The man saw the move and stopped. A cunning expression entered his eyes. Then they became at once dreamy and penetrating as they fairly bored into the girl's brain. Thuvia suddenly felt a change coming over her. What the cause of it she did not guess, but somehow the man before her began to assume a new relationship within her heart. No longer was he a strange and mysterious enemy, but an old and trusted friend. Her hand slipped from the dagger's hilt. Tario came closer. He spoke gentle, friendly words, and she answered him in a voice that seemed hers and yet another's. He was beside her now. His hand was upon her shoulder. His eyes were down, bent toward hers. She looked up into his face. His gaze seemed to bore straight through her to some hidden spring of sentiment within her. Her lips parted in sudden awe and wonder at the strange revealment of her inner self that was being laid bare before her consciousness. She had known Tario forever. He was more than friend to her. She moved a little closer to him. In one swift flood of light, she knew the truth. She loved Tario, Jeddak of Lothar. She had always loved him. The man, seeing the success of his strategy, could not restrain a faint smile of satisfaction. Whether there was something in the expression of his face, or whether from Carthoris of Helium in a far chamber of the palace came a more powerful suggestion, who may say? But something there was that suddenly dispelled the strange, hypnotic influence of the man. As though a mask had been torn from her eyes, Thuvia suddenly saw Tario as she had formerly seen him, and accustomed as she was to the strange manifestations of highly developed mentality which are common upon Barsoom, she quickly guessed enough of the truth to know that she was in grave danger. Quickly she took a step backward, tearing herself from his grasp. But the momentary contact had aroused within Tario all the long-buried passions of his loveless existence. With a muffled cry he sprang upon her, throwing his arms about her and attempting to drag her lips to his. "Woman," he cried, "lovely woman, Tario would make you queen of Lothar. Listen to me. Listen to the love of the last of the Jeddaks of Barsoom." Thuvia struggled to free herself from his embrace. "Stop, creature," she cried. "Stop. I do not love you. Stop, or I shall scream for help." Tario laughed in her face. "Scream for help," he mimicked. "And who within the halls of Lothar is there who might come in answer to your call? Who would dare enter the presence of Tario unsummoned?" "There is one," she replied, "who would come, and coming, dare to cut you down upon your own throne, if he thought that you had offered affront to Thuvia of Parth." "Who, Jav?" asked Tario. "Not Jav, nor any other soft-skinned Lotharian," she replied, "but a real man, a real warrior, Carthoris of Helium." Again the man laughed at her. "You forget the bowman," he reminded her. "What could your red warrior accomplish against my fearless legions?" Again he caught her roughly to him, dragging her towards his couch. "If you will not be my queen," he said, "you shall be my slave." "Neither," cried the girl. As she spoke the single word, there was a quick move of her right hand. Tario, releasing her, staggered back, both hands pressed to his side. At the same instant the room filled with bowmen, and then the Jeddak of Lothar sank senseless to the marble floor. At the instant that he lost consciousness, the bowmen were about to release their arrows into Thuvia's heart. Involuntarily she gave a single cry for help, though she knew that not even Carthoris of Helium could save her now. Then she closed her eyes and waited for the end. No slender shafts pierced her tender side. She raised her lids to see what stayed the hand of her executioners. The room was empty save for herself and the still form of the Jeddak of Lothar lying at her feet, a little pool of crimson staining the white marble of the floor beside him. Tario was unconscious. Thuvia was amazed. Where were the bowmen? Why had they not loosed their shafts? What could it all mean? An instant before the room had been mysteriously filled with armed men, evidently called to protect their Jeddak, yet now, with the evidence of her deed plain before them, they had vanished as mysteriously as they had come, leaving her alone with the body of their ruler, into whose side she had slipped her long, keen blade. The girl glanced apprehensively about, first for signs of the return of the bowmen, and then for some means of escape. The wall behind the dais was pierced by two small doorways, hidden by heavy hangings. Thuvia was running quickly towards one of these when she heard the clank of a warrior's metal at the end of the apartment behind her. Ah, if she had but an instant more of time, she could have reached that screening arras and perchance have found some avenue of escape behind it, but now it was too late. She had been discovered. With a feeling that was akin to apathy, she turned to meet her fate. And there, before her, running swiftly across the broad chamber to her side, was Carthoris, his naked long sword gleaming in his hand. For days she had doubted the intentions of the Heliumite. She had thought him a party to her abduction. Since fate had thrown them together, she had scarce favored him with more than the most perfunctory replies to his remarks, unless at such times as the weird and uncanny happenings at Lothar had surprised her out of her reserve. She knew that Carthoris of Helium would fight for her, but whether to save her for himself or another she was in doubt. He knew that she was promised to Kulan Tith, Jeddak of Kaal, but if he had been instrumental in her abduction, His motives could not be prompted by loyalty to his friend, or regard for her honor. And yet, as she saw him coming across the marble floor of the audience chamber of Tario of Lothar, his fine eyes filled with apprehension for her safety, his splendid figure personifying all that is finest in the fighting men of martial Mars, she could not believe that any faintest trace of perfidy lurked beneath so glorious an exterior. Never, she thought, in all her life had the sight of any man been so welcome to her. It was with difficulty that she refrained from rushing forward to meet him. She knew that he loved her, but in time she recalled that she was promised to Kulantith. Not even might she trust herself to show too great gratitude to the Heliumite lest he misunderstand. Carthoris was by her side now. His quick glance had taken in the scene within the room, the still figure of the Jeddak sprawled upon the floor, the girl hastening toward a shrouded exit. "Did he harm you, Thuvia?" he asked. She held up her crimson blade that he might see it. "No," she said, "he did not harm me." A grim smile lighted Carthoris' face. "Praise be our first ancestor," he murmured. "And now let us see if we may not make good our escape from this accursity before the Lotharians discover that their Jeddak is no more." With the firm authority that sat so well upon him, in whose veins flowed the blood of John Carter of Virginia and Deja Thoris of Helium, he grasped her hand, and turning back across the hall, strode toward the great doorway through which Jav had brought them into the presence of the Jeddak earlier in the day. They had almost reached the threshold when a figure sprang into the apartment through another entrance. It was Jav. He, too, took in the scene within at a glance. Carthoris turned to face him, his sword ready in his hand, and his great body shielding the slender figure of the girl. "Come, Jav of Lothar," he cried. "Let us face the issue at once, for only one of us may leave this chamber alive with Thuvia of Parth." Then, seeing that the man wore no sword, he exclaimed, "Bring on your bowmen, then, or come with us as my prisoner until we have safely passed the outer portals of thy ghostly city." "You have killed Tario," exclaimed Jav, ignoring the other's challenge. "You have killed Tario. I see his blood upon the floor, real blood, real death. Tario was, after all, as real as I. Yet he was an etherealist. He would not materialize his sustenance. Can it be that they are right? Well, we too are right. And all these ages we have been quarreling, each saying that the other was wrong. However, he is dead now. Of that I am glad. Now shall Jav come into his own. Now shall Jav be Jeddak of Lothar." As he finished, Tario opened his eyes and then quickly sat up. "Traitor, assassin," he screamed, and then Kadar. Kadar, which is the Barsumian for guard. Jav went sickly white. He fell upon his belly, wriggling toward Tario. "Oh, my Jeddak," he whimpered. "Jav had no hand in this. Jav, your faithful Jav, but just this instant entered the apartment to find you lying prone upon the floor and these two strangers about to leave. How it happened I know not. Believe me, most glorious Jeddak." "Cease, knave," cried Tario. "I heard your words, however, he is dead now. Of that I am glad. Now shall Jav come into his own. Now shall Jav be Jeddak of Lothar. At last, traitor, I have found you out. Your own words have condemned you as surely as the acts of these red creatures have sealed their fates, unless," he paused, "unless the woman." But he got no further. Carthoris guessed what he would have said, and before the words could be uttered he had sprung forward and struck the man across the mouth with his open palm. Tario frothed in rage and mortification. "And should you again affront the princess of Parth," warned the Heliumite, "I shall forget that you wear no sword, not forever may I control my itching sword hand." Tario shrank back toward the little doorways behind the dais. He was trying to speak, but so hideously were the muscles of his face working that he could utter no word for several minutes. At last he managed to articulate intelligibly. "Die," he shrieked, "die," and then he turned toward the exit at his back. Jav leaped forward, screaming in terror. "Have pity, Tario, have pity. Remember the long ages that I have served you faithfully. Remember all that I have done for Lothar. Do not condemn me now to the death hideous. Save me, save me." But Tario only laughed a mocking laugh and continued to back toward the hangings that hid the little doorway. Jav turned toward Carthoris. "Stop him," he screamed. "Stop him. If you love life, let him not leave this room." And as he spoke, he leaped in pursuit of his Jeddak. Carthoris followed Jav's example, but the last of the Jeddaks of Barsum was too quick for them. By the time they reached the areas behind which he had disappeared, they found a heavy stone door blocking their further progress. Jav sank to the floor in a spasm of terror. "Come, man," cried Carthoris. "We are not dead yet. Let us hasten to the avenues and make an attempt to leave the city. We are still alive. and while we live we may yet endeavor to direct our own destinies. Of what avail to sink spineless to the floor? Come, be a man. Jab but shook his head. Did you not hear him call the guards? He moaned. Ah, if we could have but intercepted him. Then there might have been hope, but alas, he was too quick for us. Well, well, exclaimed Carthoris impatiently. What if he did call the guards? There will be time enough to worry about that after they come. At present, I see no indication that they have any idea of overexerting themselves to obey their Jedic's summons. Jab shook his head mournfully. You do not understand, he said. The guards have already come and gone. They have done their work and we are lost. Look to the various exits. Carthoris and Thuvia turned their eyes in the direction of the several doorways which pierced the walls of the great chamber. Each was tightly closed by huge stone doors. Well? Asked Carthoris. We are to die the death, whispered Jab faintly. Further than that he would not say. He just sat upon the edge of the Jedic's couch and waited. Carthoris moved to Thuvia's side, and standing there with naked sword, he let his brave eyes roam ceaselessly about the great chamber, that no foe might spring upon them unseen. For what seemed hours no sound broke the silence of their living tomb. No sign gave their executioners of the time or manner of their death. The suspense was terrible. Even Carthoris of Helium began to feel the terrible strain upon his nerves. If he could but know how and whence the hand of death was to strike, he could meet it unafraid, but to suffer longer the hideous tension of this blighting ignorance of the plans of their assassins was telling upon him grievously. Thuvia of Tarth drew quite close to him. She felt safer with the feel of his arm against hers, and with the contact of her the man took a new grip upon himself. With his old-time smile he turned toward her. It would seem that they are trying to frighten us to death, he said, laughing, and shame be upon me that I should confess it, I think they were close to accomplishing their designs upon me. She was about to make some reply when a fearful shriek broke from the lips of the Lotharian. The end is coming, he cried. The end is coming. The floor. The floor. O Komal, be merciful. Thuvia and Carthoris did not need to look at the floor to be aware of the strange movement that was taking place. Slowly the marble flagging was sinking in all directions toward the center. At first the movement, being gradual, was scarce noticeable, but presently the angle of the floor became such that one might stand easily only by bending one knee considerably. Jab was shrieking still, and clawing at the royal couch that had already commenced to slide toward the center of the room, where both Thuvia and Carthoris suddenly noted a small orifice which grew in diameter as the floor assumed more closely a funnel-like contour. Now it became more and more difficult to cling to the dizzy inclination of the smooth and polished marble. Carthoris tried to support Thuvia, but himself commenced to slide and slip toward the ever-enlarging aperture. Better to cling to the smooth stone, he kicked off his sandals of zitidar hide and with his bare feet braced himself against the sickening tilt, at the same time throwing his arms supportingly about the girl. In her terror her own hands clasped about the man's neck. Her cheek was close to his. Death, unseen and of unknown form, seemed close upon them, and because unseen and unknowable infinitely more terrifying. Courage, my princess, he whispered. She looked up into his face to see smiling lips above hers and brave eyes, untouched by terror, drinking deeply of her own. Then the floor sagged and tilted more swiftly. There was a sudden slipping rush as they were precipitated toward the aperture. Jab's screams rose weird and horrible in their ears, and then the three found themselves piled upon the royal couch of Tario, which had stuck within the aperture at the base of the marble funnel.
For a moment they breathed more freely, but presently they discovered that the aperture was continuing to enlarge. The couch slipped downward. Jav shrieked again. There was a sickening sensation as they felt all let go beneath them, as they fell through darkness to an unknown death.
Chapter 9. The battle eye in the plain. The distance from the bottom of the funnel to the floor of the chamber beneath it could not have been great, for all three of the victims of Tario's wrath alighted unscathed. Carthoris, still clasping Thuvia tightly to his breast, came to the ground cat-like, upon his feet, breaking the shock for the girl. Scarce had his feet touched the rough stone flagging of this new chamber than his sword flashed out ready for instant use. But though the room was lighted, there was no sign of enemy about. Carthoris looked toward Jav. The man was pasty white with fear. "What is to be our fate?" asked the Heliamite. "Tell me, man. Shake off your terror long enough to tell me, so I may be prepared to sell my life and that of the Princess of Parth as dearly as possible." "Kamal," whispered Jav. "We are to be devoured by Kamal." "Your deity?" asked Carthoris. The Lotharian nodded his head. Then he pointed toward a low doorway at one end of the chamber. From thence will he come upon us. Lay aside your puny sword, fool. It will but enrage him the more and make our sufferings the worse. Carthoris smiled, gripping his long sword the more firmly. Presently Jav gave a horrified moan, at the same time pointing toward the door. He has come, he whimpered. Carthoris and Thuvia looked in the direction the Lotharian had indicated, expecting to see some strange and fearful creature in human form. But to their astonishment they saw the broad head and great maned shoulders of a huge banth, the largest that either ever had seen. Slowly and with dignity the mighty beast advanced into the room. Jav had fallen to the floor and was wriggling his body in the same servile manner that he had adopted toward Tario. He spoke to the fierce beast as he would have spoken to a human being, pleading with it for mercy. Carthoris stepped between Thuvia and the banth, his sword ready to contest the beast's victory over them. Thuvia turned toward Jav. "Is this Kamal your god?" she asked. Jav nodded affirmatively. The girl smiled, and then, brushing past Carthoris, she stepped swiftly toward the growling carnivore. In low, firm tones she spoke to it as she had spoken to the banths of the Golden Cliffs and the scavengers before the walls of Lothar. The beast ceased its growling. With lowered head and cat-like purr, it came slinking to the girl's feet. Thuvia turned toward Carthoris. "It is but a banth," she said. "We have nothing to fear from it." Carthoris smiled. "Dumb." "I did not fear it," he replied, "for I, too, believe it to be only a banth, and I have my long sword." Jav sat up and gazed at the spectacle before him, the slender girl weaving her fingers in the tawny mane of the huge creature that he had thought divine, while Kamal rubbed his hideous snout against her side. "So this is your god?" laughed Thuvia. Jav looked bewildered. He scarce knew whether he dare chance offending Kamal or not, for so strong is the power of superstition that even though we know that we have been reverencing a sham, yet still we hesitate to admit the validity of our newfound convictions. "Yes," he said, "this is Kamal. For ages the enemies of Tario have been hurled to this pit to fill his maw, for Kamal must be fed." "Is there any way out of this chamber to the avenues of the city?" asked Carthoris. Jav shrugged. "I do not know," he replied. "Never have I been here before, nor ever have I cared to do so." "Come," suggested Thuvia, "let us explore. There must be a way out." Together the three approached the doorway through which Kamal had entered the apartment that was to have witnessed their deaths. Beyond was a low-roofed lair, with a small door at the far end. This, to their delight, opened to the lifting of an ordinary latch, letting them into a circular arena, surrounded by tiers of seats. "Here is where Kamal is fed in public," explained Jav. "Had Tario dared it would have been here that our fates had been sealed, but he feared too much thy keen blade, red man, and so he hurled us all downward to the pit. I did not know how closely connected were the two chambers. Now we may easily reach the avenues and the city gates. Only the bowmen may dispute the right of way, and knowing their secret, I doubt that they have power to harm us." Another door led to a flight of steps that rose from the arena level upward through the seats to an exit at the back of the hall. Beyond this was a straight, broad corridor, running directly through the palace to the gardens at the side. No one appeared to question them as they advanced, mighty Kamal pacing by the girl's side. "Where are the people of the palace, the Jedik's retinue?" asked Carthoris. "Even in the city streets as we came through I scarce saw sign of a human being, yet all about are evidences of a mighty population." Jav sighed. "Poor Lothar," he said. "It is indeed a city of ghosts. There are scarce 1,000 of us left, who once were numbered in the millions. Our great city is peopled by the creatures of our own imaginings. For our own needs we do not take the trouble to materialize these peoples of our brain, yet they are apparent to us. Even now I see great throngs lining the avenue, hastening to and fro in the round of their duties. I see women and children laughing on the balconies, these we are forbidden to materialize, but yet I see them, they are here. But why not?" he mused. "No longer need I fear Tario, he has done his worst and failed. Why not indeed? Stay friends," he continued. "Would you see Lothar in all her glory?" Carthoris and Thuvia nodded their assent, more out of courtesy than because they fully grasped the import of his mutterings. Jav gazed at them penetratingly for an instant, then, with a wave of his hand, cried, "Look." The sight that met them was awe-inspiring. Where before there had been naught but deserted pavements and scarlet swords, yawning windows and tenantless doors, now swarmed a countless multitude of happy, laughing people. "It is the past," said Jav in a low voice. They do not see us, they but live the old dead past of ancient Lothar, the dead and crumbled Lothar of antiquity, which stood upon the shore of Thraxus, mightiest of the 5 oceans. See those fine, upstanding men swinging along the broad avenue. See the young girls and the women smile upon them. See the men greet them with love and respect. Those be seafarers coming up from their ships which lie at the quays at the city's edge. Brave men they are, but the glory of Lothar has faded. See their weapons, they alone bore arms, for they crossed the 5 seas to strange places where dangers were, with their passing past the martial spirit of the Lotharians, leaving, as the ages rolled by, a race of spineless cowards. We hated war, and so we trained not our youth in warlike ways. Thus followed our undoing, for when the seas dried and the green hordes encroached upon us, we could do naught but flee. But we remembered the seafaring bowmen of the days of our glory. It is the memory of these which we hurl upon our enemies. As Jav ceased speaking, the picture faded, and once more the 3 took up their way toward the distant gates, along deserted avenues. Twice they sighted Lotharians of flesh and blood. At sight of them and the huge banth which they must have recognized as Kamal, the citizens turned and fled. They will carry word of our flight to Tario, cried Jav, and soon he will send his bowmen after us. Let us hope that our theory is correct, and that their shafts are powerless against minds cognizant of their unreality. Otherwise we are doomed. Explain, Red Man, to the woman the truths that I have explained to you, that she may meet the arrows with a stronger counter-suggestion of immunity. Carthoris did as Jab bid him, but they came to the great gates without sign of pursuit developing. Here Jab set in motion the mechanism that rolled the huge, wheel-like gate aside, and a moment later the 3, accompanied by the banth, stepped out into the plain before Lothar. Scarce had they covered 100 yards when the sound of many men shouting arose behind them. As they turned, they saw a company of bowmen debouching upon the plain from the gate through which they had but just passed. Upon the wall above the gate were a number of Lotharians, among whom Jav recognized Tario. The Jeddak stood glaring at them, evidently concentrating all the forces of his trained mind upon them. That he was making a supreme effort to render his imaginary creatures deadly was apparent. Jav turned white and commenced to tremble. At the crucial moment he appeared to lose the courage of his conviction. The great banth turned back toward the advancing bowmen and growled. Carthoris placed himself between Thuvia and the enemy, and facing them, awaited the outcome of their charge. Suddenly an inspiration came to Carthoris. Hurl your own bowmen against Tario's, he cried to Jav. Let us see a materialized battle between 2 mentalities. The suggestion seemed to hearten the Lotharian, and in another moment the 3 stood behind solid ranks of huge bowmen, who hurled taunts and menaces at the advancing company emerging from the walled city. Jav was a new man the moment his battalion stood between him and Tario. One could almost have sworn the man believed these creatures of his strange hypnotic power to be real flesh and blood. With hoarse battle cries they charged the bowmen of Tario. Barbed shafts flew thick and fast. Men fell, and the ground was red with gore. Carthoris and Thuvia had difficulty in reconciling the reality of it all with their knowledge of the truth. They saw Udin after Utin march from the gate in perfect step to reinforce the outnumbered company which Tario had first sent forth to arrest them. They saw Jav's forces grow correspondingly until all about them rolled a sea of fighting, cursing warriors, and the dead lay in heaps about the field. Jav and Tario seemed to have forgotten all else beside the struggling bowmen that surged to and fro, filling the broad field between the forest and the city. The wood loomed close behind Thuvia and Carthoris. The latter cast a glance toward Jav. Come, he whispered to the girl. Let them fight out their empty battle. Neither, evidently, has power to harm the other. They are like 2 controversialists hurling words at one another. While they are engaged, we may as well be devoting our energies to an attempt to find the passage through the cliffs to the plain beyond. As he spoke, Jav, turning from the battle for an instant, caught his words. He saw the girl move to accompany the heliumite. A cunning look leaped to the Lotharian's eyes. The thing that lay beyond that look had been deep in his heart since first he had laid eyes upon Thuvia of Parth. He had not recognized it, however, until now that she seemed about to pass out of his existence. He centered his mind upon the heliumite and the girl for an instant. Carthoris saw Thuvia of Parth step forward with outstretched hand. He was surprised at this sudden softening toward him, and it was with a full heart that he let his fingers close upon hers, as together they turned away from forgotten Lothar, into the woods, and bent their steps toward the distant mountains. As the Lotharian had turned toward them, Thuvia had been surprised to hear Carthoris suddenly voice a new plan. Remain here with Jav, she had heard him say, while I go to search for the passage through the cliffs. She had dropped back in surprise and disappointment, for she knew that there was no reason why she should not have accompanied him. Certainly she should have been safer with him than left here alone with the Lotharian. And Jav watched the two and smiled his cunning smile. When Carthoris had disappeared within the wood, Thuvia seated herself apathetically upon the scarlet sward to watch the seemingly interminable struggles of the bowmen. The long afternoon dragged its weary way toward darkness, and still the imaginary legions charged and retreated. The sun was about to set when Tario commenced to withdraw his troops slowly toward the city. His plan for cessation of hostilities through the night evidently met with Jav's entire approval, for he caused his forces to form themselves in orderly U-tains and march just within the edge of the wood, where they were soon busily engaged in preparing their evening meal and spreading down their sleeping silks and furs for the night. Thuvia could scarce repress a smile as she noted the scrupulous care with which Jav's imaginary men attended to each tiny detail of deportment, as truly as if they had been real flesh and blood. Sentries were posted between the camp and the city. Officers clanked hither and thither issuing commands and seeing to it that they were properly carried out. Thuvia turned toward Jav. "Why is it," she asked, "that you observe such careful nicety in the regulation of your creatures when Tario knows quite as well as you that they are but figments of your brain? Why not permit them simply to dissolve into thin air until you again require their feudal service?" "You do not understand them," replied Jav. "While they exist, they are real. I do but call them into being now, and in a way direct their general actions. But thereafter, until I dissolve them, they are as actual as you or I. Their officers command them, under my guidance. I am the general, that is all. And the psychological effect upon the enemy is far greater than were I to treat them merely as substanceless vagaries. Then, too," continued the Lotharian, "there is always the hope, which with us is little short of belief, that some day these materializations will merge into the real, that they will remain, some of them, after we have dissolved their fellows, and that thus we shall have discovered a means for perpetuating our dying race. Some there are who claim already to have accomplished the thing. It is generally supposed that the etherealists have quite a few among their number who are permanent materializations. It is even said that such as Tario, but that cannot be, for he existed before we had discovered the full possibilities of suggestion. There are others among us who insist that none of us is real, that we could not have existed all these ages without material food and water had we ourselves been material. Although I am a realist, I rather incline toward this belief myself. It seems well and sensibly based upon the belief that our ancient forebears developed before their extinction such wondrous mentalities, that some of the stronger minds among them lived after the death of their bodies, that we are but the deathless minds of individuals long dead. It would appear possible, and yet in so far as I am concerned I have all the attributes of corporeal existence. I eat, I sleep." He paused, casting a meaning look upon the girl I love. Thuvia could not mistake the palpable meaning of his words and expression. She turned away with a little shrug of disgust that was not lost upon the Lotharian. He came close to her and seized her arm. "Why not Jav?" he cried. "Who more honorable than the second of the world's most ancient race? Your Helimeet? He is gone. He has deserted you to your fate to save himself. Come, be Jav's." Thuvia of Parth rose to her full height, her lifted shoulder turned toward the man, her haughty chin upraised, a scornful twist to her lips. "You lie," she said quietly. "The Helimeet knows less of disloyalty than he knows of fear, and of fear he is as ignorant as the unhatched young." "Then where is he?" taunted the Lotharian. "I tell you he has fled the valley. He has left you to your fate. But Jav will see that it is a pleasant one. Tomorrow we shall return into Lothar at the head of my victorious army, and I shall be Jeddak and you shall be my consort. Come." And he attempted to crush her to his breast. The girl struggled to free herself, striking at the man with her metal armlets. Yet still he drew her toward him, until both were suddenly startled by a hideous growl that rumbled from the dark wood close behind them. This concludes the 4th part of 6 total of Thuvia, Maid of Mars, by Edgar Rice Burroughs, produced by Best Audiobooks for free.